Hi there everyone, and welcome to the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage. Today I am making a video which I suspect will become a series of videos on a topic that many people, few people ever ask me about, and yet many people who have sewing machines, certainly from the vintage era, and people looking for machines don't always think about this topic, but it's something that I thought I would make a video and begin sharing with you all my experience with sewing machine cabinets and sewing machine tables. Now I use those terms interchangeably. It depends, sometimes it's a table because it doesn't have any drawers. Some people say, well, if it has drawers, it's a cabinet. But semantics aside, I wanted to talk about this because, as many of you know, I have been spending years on YouTube now talking about how underappreciated and amazing vintage sewing machines are. And then I also realized that many people have no idea just how incredible the sewing machine tables are. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today and how many people have diamonds in the rough. They have these pieces of furniture that are often relegated to let's just say less than ideal conditions when it comes to furniture. So I want to discuss that with you all a bit today, but I'm starting with the video. What you see in the picture is not a sewing machine table. That's a little side table that you see here next to the sofa. What you are looking at is a carrying case. And inside that carrying case is a Singer 15-91 with a potted motor if anyone is interested. But I actually am showing you the case for a reason. Because many people don't appreciate the fact that when you went to buy a sewing machine in the year 1950, and I'm just going to pull that year out, by 1950, this is toward the end of the period when Singer and other companies were using wooden cases. You see in front of you a really incredible, they're called waterfall or bent wood cases. And this type of case would eventually be replaced by cases that had fabric on them, grass cloth, and eventually plastic. But at this time, they were making the cases out of wood. And this is what you got. When you bought a machine, you got a carrying case. That was included with it, I believe. But what you did not get was a sewing table. Now, it may seem odd, and you might think, well, why not? Because a lot of people sewed lots of projects, and a table would have been great to have. But it's important to remember that sewing machines and sewing machine tables were incredibly expensive items for a family to purchase. They were not purchased lightly, and they often could not be purchased outright. There were some people, yes, who could pay for brand new things with, writing a check or with cash. This is the days before credit cards. But many folks had to establish credit terms, and they had to make payments. And that's just how costly they were. And people were heavily sort of tied to tradition. So a lot of people had sewing machine tables for their older sewing machines. And so if you were going to sell a sewing table, it was not a given that the customer would buy it from you. But if they did, they got something really special. So I'm going to start. I'm just using the inventory of what I have on hand at this moment in my inventory, which is constantly changing. As all of you know, I am not a collector of vintage sewing machines. I think of myself as a rescuer. I take them and I bring them back into full reconditioned service, and then I find new homes for them, for people who want a sewing machine that is both vintage and reliable. So, as many of you know or may have heard of, the earliest tables for sewing machines, of course, were treadle tables. And you have to remember, sewing machines are very old, and they go back well into the early 19th century. Singer, just as a reference point, was founded in 1851, but there were sewing machines out before Singer had his company. And so sewing machines had been around a while, and of course they were initially used in factories and then introduced for domestic consumption. These are called home or domestic sewing machines. And they were put into treadle tables. Now sometimes people who don't know these tables very well might call them a pedal table. And you can't blame them because there's a big pedal at the base of it. And whether it was Singer or White or any of the other brands, they all had these. And if you've never tried to use a treadle, I encourage any of you to give it a try if you know someone who has a treadle table. They're fascinating to use, and you might just be surprised at the great power, piercing power that your needles have, because you have a giant flywheel, which you see, I'll zoom in for all of you, you see it right here, and that flywheel spins when the belt is attached to it. I have a machine that I have restored. I'll be doing a video on it at some point, and it's going to be installed into this table. But again, there is a giant flywheel. And of course, the treadle belt, which I will also show all of you how I install that when I do this, because I'm now starting to get much better light that we're coming into spring and summer. But these tables were a mainstay in homes for, well, actually they were in production for well over a century, because even after electrification comes into play in many Western countries and a lot of the developed world, you still have people all over the world who need treadle tables. There are people today who still sew with treadle tables because they have issues with electricity in some parts of the world. So that's also was a surprise to me when I started looking at these. Now it's important, I'm going to talk to you guys today a lot about why the tables were essentially very expensive, and basically how people could justify buying them. Now, this table is from around the year, I haven't dated it exactly, but I'm going to say it's around the year 1915, 1918, right around the time of the First World War. It could be a little earlier. Notice that you will see little drawers on either side. Now sometimes you might just see one little drawer, sometimes you might see 3 on each side, or even 4, because the tables were priced based on how many drawers that you chose. And if you said, well, I need more drawers, well, that'll be extra. And remember, the idea of upgrading or upselling the customer is a very old idea. It's nothing new. Many of us are very used to being upsold in all sorts of situations with products, but it's not a new thing. So this table is actually made in oak, but of course you had different wood finishes, and that would actually expand over the years. Now, one thing to note about treadle tables, and this will kind of help you when you're looking to date them. I'm going to open up the top of this particular table, and I'll let you guys take a peek inside. By this point in history, already sewing machines are designed to pivot, and they pivot off of hinges that have pins, and of course the machine attaches to a pin. I'm going to be doing a video in this series on how to transport sewing machines in tables, and how to also remove the machine from a table and to reinsert it. But that's for another day. The reason I'm showing you this, though, is that I had another treadle table that was older. It was around 1903 or so. And that table was very interesting because that table was one of the earlier treadles, and it had basically a place you installed the machine. There was a pan that sat underneath it to catch oil and who knows what, to keep it off of the floor of your home. And then, of course, a box or a cover, they have different names for these, would be placed on top of the machine. And it was not unlike, sometimes they might resemble the top cover of a sewing machine carrying case, but it wasn't a case. Sometimes they had handles and sometimes they did not. And what's funny about this is that the whole purpose of that, and these little covers were very ornate and beautifully made. The whole idea here was to camouflage the fact that you had a machine in your house. But it's kind of funny because, of course, everyone knew it was a sewing machine. But the idea was that, now, you could keep dust off the machine, of course. But it was just a decorative feature and also a protective feature back in the day. So, Other people thought that maybe they did not want to look at the iron supports of the sewing machine treadle table. And that is why you had what were referred to, or at least are now referred to as Parlor treadle tables. Now this one is a relatively simple table, and I suspect that at some point in its life the doors were rebuilt and someone made them to coordinate with this original top. There's actually a drawer still here, and you see the top, and this is oak. This looks different to me, and in fact I can actually see it's a very nice quality ply, but at some point it was modified. But as you can tell, if I'll open the doors for you, there's the treadle mechanism below. And these were called Parlor tables, and again the whole concept was to make the sewing machine appear as just another piece of furniture, to help it to blend in with the decor of the house. And when you realize just how small the average home was, even in 1950, it may surprise some of you to know that the average house in North America in 1950 was approximately between 800 and 900 square feet. And people, you know, they had good-sized families. And so space was at a premium. And people had to really justify, you know, bringing in another piece of furniture. But of course, the sewing machine held a very important place in family life. It was not a small thing. It was a pretty big deal because of the way people sourced their clothing. Now, the table you're looking at now is a sewing machine table, and the year for this table is somewhere around the late 40s. Now, if you look at it at first glance, you might think, oh, it's a treadle table, but is it missing something? What you're looking at, you see the little stool that it came with, and there's a Singer 201 that I rescued that is still waiting for my attention. It is sitting there covered in its cobwebs, but that doesn't scare me because I know it's a 201, and we're going to get it to sing and run and really be a great sewing machine again. But I wanted to show this table to you all because some of you may have seen these and it may have tricked you at first. At a distance, you might think, oh, there's a treadle table. But of course, it is not a treadle, and it never was. This particular table is it's a sewing machine table for an electric sewing machine, which the 201 was. But you can, and I'm purely theorizing here, but you can imagine why they would have built a cabinet in this style. And part of the reason may have been the fact that people are, again, very tradition bound. And they may have learned to sew on a treadle table. They may have one. And the idea of electric sewing machines, while it sounds very normal to us, was actually, you know, kind of a radical thought. It's like, oh yeah, I don't know if I need that. You know, people had learned to sew when they were very young, and my theory is that this style of table was sort of a transition style. It's a table for an electric machine, and down below there's nothing under there other than the four legs of the table and the stool. So I will pull out the 201, the old dusty, grimy 201 that is it's in a sad state at the moment, but we're going to fix that, like I said. So I'll take the stool out, the matching stool, and I honestly don't even know if stools came with the tables. You would hope so, but you know, I don't know for sure. But there you go, guys. It's not as if this was a treadle and someone removed the hardware for the treadling. It never had it. And so I've been tricked a few times. I've been in vintage, you know, thrift stores before, and at a distance I would see, I think, oh, somebody brought a treadle in. And then I get there, and of course there is no treadle in there. It never was. So it's a more modern, quote unquote, table posing as a treadle style, treadle like table. And this, I believe this was, again, marketed to help people get used to the idea that sewing machine technology was moving away from treadling, which that sounds so quaint to us today, but people had made wonderful things with treadle tables, and so getting them to change was not easy. It was a transition thing, and that is, like I say, one of the reasons I actually bought this, because I wanted the 201. This is the table it came in. I'm going to be doing, by the way, a series of videos on how to recondition sewing machine tables, and it does not involve stripping or refinishing them. in the traditional sense. So while we're here, I want to show you something else that will hopefully sort of bring home the idea of just how strong and incredibly well made these tables are. Okay guys, many of you, there will be times when you will come across a sewing machine that you want, and it's in a table, and it doesn't look like the gorgeous Singer Cabinet 43 that I'm going to be doing a video on and sharing with you all, and it's in immaculate shape. This table, not so much. This table was beautiful when it was new, but I could tell that it was not, I didn't get this from the original owner. And there's, again, all of these tables have a certain story, and I'll be doing a little separate video on the cabinets, where they came from, and who knows what kind of lives these cabinets had with the machines in them. But many of you will sometimes see a table. It's going to look like this. This thing's dirty. It's covered in dust. It has lost a lot of its lacquer finish. In fact, it's down to bare wood in many places. So we're going to talk about that in a future video on, well, what do you do? Because some people don't want these tables for a whole host of reasons. They say, oh, that old table. But this old table, all of these old tables, are some of the best furniture you may ever own. And I know that's a bold statement, and many of you have gorgeous furniture in your homes, and I'm sure that's true. But I'm willing to bet that a lot of the newer furniture that people purchase, while it may be nice, it's actually not made as well as something, in this case, this table was sitting in a garage. You know, just you know, it was not given a lot of respect, and that's unfortunate. So I'm going to open this up. I wanted to actually show you parts of, the main thing I want to show you is how this particular table, and all the tables like this are sort of constructed in a similar fashion. So let's take a look, guys. If you see, a lot of times, of course, you'll see this. This is a side plate, and I'll explain in a little bit why you see that. And of course, it's attached to a big spring, and that big spring is there. This one's a little loose, and it's there to help pick up the sewing machine and pull it up out of the table, because these machines are quite heavy. And this was sort of an assisting device, if you will. But the main thing I wanted you to see is, I'm going to zoom in. I want you to see the construction of this table, which it may look old and dirty, but the quality is unbelievable. First of all, let's see if I can highlight. You have different panels of the table itself that come together. Here's the leg. You have 2 sections of wood here that add bracing. You have a thick steel plate. That plate must be 1/8 of an inch thick. I mean, it's not thin. And I count 1, 2, 3, 4, and then in the center is 5 wood screws, good size wood screws. Then you come down here and you'll see a blocking, a little piece here that's done to add extra reinforcement, and it has a screw. And then below this, and it's going to be hard for you guys to see it, but I'll try my best to kind of zoom in here. Just below this wood block, right there, is another one of these. So all of this bracing, this is for one corner of the table. These tables are incredibly strong. It is remarkable to me that they did this. Now, obviously, the sewing machines are very heavy. They weigh a lot, right? So you say, oh, of course they did. But again, the quality of construction it's just hard to fathom. Now, while we're here, I'm going to show you something that you want to look for. In fact, I think I mentioned this in one of my earlier videos, and one of my viewers noticed they thought that they were missing a foot pedal. Of course, this is a Singer, really real close-up of it with my hand. This is, of course, a commonly found button-style Singer foot pedal. And as I mentioned it a couple times, but I want to show you actually what I was referring to. You could put this on the floor. Of course, it would be plugged into the machine. But what if you wanted to have knee control? Well, Singer was clever because they gave you the option of either one, because the very same foot pedal would slip into a slot. And the little bracket and the slot are sitting right here. It looks just like this one. This came out of another table. And so what you would do is you would take your button, let's zoom back out a bit here. You would take your button style controller and you would put it inside the bracket. And it would slide. In this case, this one slides up from the bottom. Sometimes they slide down from the top. And so you would pull it in and it would clip right there. And so now it's sitting here. Well, the button is right where my thumb is, and of course, down below. Now we're underneath the table, guys. Bear with me because it's kind of an odd angle here. But now you see the foot pedal. You see where I dropped it, or I actually pulled it up into the slot. And again, sometimes they drop down, but it's the same principle. Now your foot pedal has a place to sit, and you have a knee lever. And normally it could be out of sight. But look under the table and you'll see it as you pull down. And of course, as you push in with your knee, this lever is attached. It has a linkage and it pushes against the button that you would normally be pushing with your foot. Now, some of you have told me you weren't aware of this and you thought that you were going to have to get a new foot pedal and you had it all the time. It was sitting in the table. But don't feel bad. I've done that myself. Where's the foot pedal? It's in there. It was just hiding. It was a convenience feature that Singer provided. Okay, folks, this is a really good place to talk about a pretty important specification. Most of the time, the tables are going to vary depending on the style of the table, and every sewing machine brand sold its own tables. Now, sometimes you will get a table and it looks like it fits a Singer, and you may not be able to tell if it was originally a Singer table or, say, a table that was offered by one of the European companies in particular, because Singer was such a ubiquitous brand in the vintage era that if you wanted to get into the market, let's say you were the Italian company Necchi or the German company Pfaff, and you wanted to sell sewing machines, well, if your customers or your potential customers were going to have to buy a new table and they already had one that fit a Singer, you can see why so many companies chose to use Singer's footprint. This way, oh, no problem, your new Necchi can fit into your Singer cabinet. But anyway, this is what I wanted to show all of you. These are key dimensions, and I know some of you can get this online, but it's kind of nice to see this. So, the Singer footprint for its sewing machines for most of its history was 7 inches deep. So the opening front to back is 7 inches. Length is where you will see a variation, and so when you're shopping for tables, the easiest sewing machine table to find is a Singer because there were so many of them, but you need to watch the dimensions, okay? A huge part of Singer's history, the dimensions on their tables was just around 14 3/4 inches, okay? 14 3/4 inches wide. Now, you'll notice that the opening in this table, as it actually goes to 16 5/8, just a hair past 16.5 inches. Now, you might think, well, why is that? Obviously, there's a plate here that fills in the gap. But the reason for this was, over time, Singer began to introduce new sewing machine designs, and they changed the width of the platform of those designs. And I happen to have a 301 that I will bring here and show you. Okay, so let's say you had a Singer 301. Once you put the end down on the sewing deck there on the left, look, it needs that 16 5/8 dimension. So it's in the 1950s when Singer came out with a wider sewing machine bed. And that was very great, but remember, Singer would have had the same challenges. Ugh, even a 301 is heavy by today's plastic standards. Singer would have had lots of customers who said, listen, I have a beautiful sewing table at home, right? And so if someone needed a new table, they could get this new wide dimension, but then there was a filler plate, which you see here, a place for the cords, and of course that spring, it was probably marketed as, look how much easier it is to pull that machine up out of there with that spring. So This is sort of a basic primer on the Singer sewing dimension, and it's an important one to know because a lot of the cabinets you come across are going to have this, this footprint, if you will, for installing a machine. Now the good news is that your hinge pins, which sit right here, typically line up with every Singer sewing machine. And whether it's the 301 or whether it is one of the earlier machines that had the 14 3/4 width, they all typically work. And Singer planned it that way. They had to because they were going to get pushback from their customers if they didn't make this a flexible thing. Because when you see an upcoming video I'm making, I'm going to talk to you about, I found out how much these cabinets would have cost in 1950. And oh my God, I really had to just, my mouth dropped when I saw it. I couldn't believe it. While we're here also, let's talk about these. Now, I will mention this again when I talk, I'm going to do a video on how to remove sewing machines. If you see a sewing machine table and it has these pins, normally what you want to do is if you ever have to take a machine out of a table, it really, you don't want to remove this hinge. Now, a lot of people look at this and intuitively think, oh, okay, this hinge is attached to the machine, I'll just remove the hinge. You can do this, but remember, these are wood screws. And when you go to put it back in, the screw and the attachment of that screw to the wood is going to be weaker. And you don't want this to be weak because these hinge pins they are asked to do a lot because they essentially hold the machine in suspension, hanging, like a bat when the machine's not in use. Now, these pins attach to the machine, to the back of the machine, with holes that go into the back edge of the bed, and there are set screws. And again, I will cover this in another video how to do this, but just while we're here, I wanted to make this point. If you can, don't ever remove these. If they have been removed and it needs new pins, there's a way to do this, but it's different. So if you can avoid it, fine. If not, don't worry, there is a way to remedy pins that have been removed. But you'll save yourself a work and a project if you just leave these in. There are set screws underneath the machine that will allow it to come free from the pins, and again, I will illustrate that in another video. Okay, now you guys are looking at a cabinet, and this cabinet would have been one of the more basic cabinets, but it was not cheap. It was pretty expensive. And when I talk about the price of these cabinets in that future video, you'll see just how expensive they were. This particular one was done in maple, and the top doesn't look all that great now. It's got some wear, but we're going to do some work on the cabinet and trying to recondition it. It's still in pretty good shape. I've seen a lot worse, but aesthetically we may want to recondition the top. But I'm showing this to you because there is one other. Whoops. There's actually two features that I want to show you here, and I just heard one. Okay, I'll show you the feature that there was this metallic sound when you open the tops of many, but not all, vintage sewing machine cabinets. Look to the left of the cabinet, folks, when I lift up the top, and you see an automatic. This is just a support lever for the lid of the cabinet. This is wood. This is not plastic, and so it gave a little support. It was to help prevent damage in case some child went to hang on it or something, which you definitely wouldn't want to have happen anyway. But so here you are, and actually some of you may see, here's the little Singer 185J. You've seen my videos on it. It's still waiting for its new owner, and it's right now tucked away in the table. But I'm going to show you this also to give you an idea of its measurement. Now, as I mentioned to you in I think another video, but I will be extra sure, most of the Singer cabinets that you come across are going to have the dimensions that I just highlighted with that other table that the 201 came in. But many people who purchased the 3/4 size Singer sewing machines, such as the 185J and also the Singer 99s, those machines were 3/4 the width of the standard Singer. And most of the time, those machines the majority of them were sold in cases, and they were billed as portable, quote unquote portable. They're still god awful heavy, but they were lighter than the full size. Now, occasionally, some of the customers would have said, you know, I don't want a case, I want a table, but I want the 3/4 machine. And so Singer developed tables, and this width, this width, where are you, is 12¼ inches wide, but again, the depth is the classic same. It's still 7 inches, which all Singers were. Now, notice another common hallmark of a Singer table is, of course, the corners. One of the ways that you know that you might, and I say might, have a Singer table is because the corners are rounded. Now, other companies did this as well, but they were often copying Singer. If I see this, and if I have, you know, take a tape measure with you and a quick measurement, I almost always know that the Singer is what fits in it. Most Singers from the vintage era had pins that looked something like this. They have sort of a bronze, you know, old copper look to them. I don't know, I think they're just made of steel. And this is what they look like, generally speaking. Okay, so let's see what else to share with you. Sometimes your sewing table, and people would call this a table because it didn't have drawers, but you know, we're splitting hairs here in terms of the terminology. They would have a little drawer that would slide out, and I put a little grease on it to help it. It was squeaking because it needed some grease on it. It has like a tension loaded, I'm not sure what to call that, but anyway, it's loaded so that it stays shut until you open it. And this was where you could put some basic sewing notions. Sometimes you'll find later cabinets in the 60s, the companies had already, just like they were cheapening out the machines, they started making these false fronts. So there was a drawer pull, but you pull on it and nothing opens because there is no drawer. So they were so sneaky and clever at decontenting things, and part of it was to resist raising prices, and the other was just to increase profit. When I say, you know, to reduce costs, you know, you can imagine what the cost would have been to create a wooden platform and this, you know, beautiful waterfall wooden case cover for this Singer from, say, 1948, 1950. And then this is the case that the Janome hybrid vintage machine I've been restoring, that's what this came in. And it's basically made of some sort of press board. It's got some fabric inside, some vinyl, and then the whole thing's covered in vinyl. And vinyl is nothing but a form of plastic. So, again, you shouldn't be shocked or surprised to see this. It's not just sewing machines that got cheapened over the years. Virtually everything consumers buy was made more cheaply, more poorly, and designed to not last as long. That's been my impression as I've gone through looking at all sorts of consumer items with a focus on sewing machines, obviously. Now, one of the things you'll notice with a lot of these tables is all of them come in a certain range of styles, and many of them they look like copies of each other, and they kind of were. They were simply reproductions of past furniture styles. You know, residential furniture in North America, it pretty much has looked the same for a very long time with, you know, slight modifications in style, but nothing really radical. Sometimes you will find a table, and I found this one. There was no machine in it, but the table, they didn't want much for it. It seemed to be in pretty good condition. Now, if you look, you will see that this table has the same dimensions as the little Singer 185J99 model. And this table is unusual because I seldom see Japanese clones with this footprint. Most Japanese clones have the 14 3/4 width that the classic Singers did. Some of them may have come out later with the 16 and 5/8, but pretty much I almost never see this. Now, you might say, well, how do you know it wasn't for a Singer? I don't know that for sure, but one of the things I noticed is the hinges look different. And Singer typically, and thankfully, didn't change a lot of things. So it's, you know, Singer kept making the same things for many years because it was proven technology, their costs were lower, They've sometimes been criticized for that, but from a restorer's point of view, it's really helpful. But this table has different hinges, and that tells me, I believe some other brand, some company made a clone of the Singer 99, or the 185J as it was later called. And because it has this round cornered edge, and it has the same exact dimensions as the Singer 3/4 machine. You've got 7 inches deep, and here you have 12 1/4 inches in width. Now I'm going to show you my Necky table, my Necky BCJ, and it is also a copy, but you want to be careful with the Neckys when you're trying to put them into a table other than a Necky table. Okay, so this is a Necky table that I have in stock. I have a lot of machines that are from like 1948, 1950. I didn't plan that. They just, they come in waves for some reason. But it's kind of nice, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to make this video series. Now, this table, like many, was not kept indoors. It was for most of its life, and then the person I got it from, it was in a garage, and that's where you find them sometimes. I think it had some kind of heavy stuff sitting on it. It is a beast of a table, and it is walnut. And this table was really expensive when it was new, and I'll talk about that in that future video coming up on just how much it would cost to get one of these today. And I'm not even talking about the machine, I'm just talking about the table. Okay. Now, one thing to mention to you, and this is true whether it's a 3/4 or a regular full-size machine, when it comes to some of the European brands. So I'll open up the top gently. Now, while we're here, I will show you one of the things that's really cool about Necky table. It is this. One of the things that may give you a tip that you might have, there are always going to be exceptions to this, but you might have a Necky table, is that Necky, for a part of its history, would take and put decals along the front edge of the table with a straight edge, in inches. So you could have a handy little metric there right in front of you. I thought that was rather clever. Now, I called this the Necky Junior. It's actually not a 3/4. This is the Necky BCJ. It's a straight stitcher, and it is currently in a sad state waiting for my work, but I'm waiting on I've got to get a thread guide for it that it's missing. Now, notice the width is 14 3/4 inches, and the depth is 7. And you think, oh, and I've got the curved corners. Yes, Necky copied this footprint for their machines because, again, they wanted, if they had a customer who loved the little Italian machine, but they had a beautiful Singer cabinet or table, they could buy the machine and it would fit. However, there's a little asterisk in the fine print there. And the reason for this, guys, is notice that the spacing of the hinge pins, and you can't see them because Necky, is Italian design, so they were very clever. They hid the hinge pins underneath. It's more awkward for me if I ever have to remove them. That's why I try not to. But notice where the hinge pins are. When companies copied the Singer footprint, they were supposed to copy not just the depth and the width opening, but also the spacing of the pins. Sometimes you will go, let's say you have a Singer table and you want to put a Necky sewing machine in it, or maybe you find a Necky table and you really love it and you want to put a Singer sewing machine in it. They should be interchangeable. However, you may have to make modifications, and the reason is the Italians used metric, and of course Singer, in North America anyway, would have used imperial English measurements in inches and spacing, and that's why sometimes they're slightly off. So just a heads up, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try it, but you may have to modify it a bit in order to get it to work, particularly with the pins themselves. So there you go. That is another example of, that is an example of a European company thinking, why don't we copy the footprint for the Singer? That'll help us it'll make it easier for us to sell sewing machines. And again, when I make that video on how much a vintage cabinet cost back in the day, you'll understand why a lot of customers would balk at the idea of having to buy another cabinet when they already had one and they remembered how expensive they were. So I'm going to end this video, guys, with one of my favorite tables, and I'm not even sure why I call it a favorite. I have purchased and reconditioned, restored, and sold one of these in the past. I've done quite a few rotary machines. Many of them were in cases or other tables, but this particular cabinet table / table this is only the second one that I have done. And a lot of people were not willing to pay the exorbitant price. This one is in walnut, and it is exquisite. Yes, it has a few rough spots, and I'm going to be reconditioning that. If you look closely, but the walnut itself is just an incredible. It's aged beautifully. A little scuffing down here. And of course, they paid attention to detail. So let me zoom in. And you'll see over here to the far right is actually one of the drawers. I'm going to move the camera. Now, if you look closely, there's a drawer here. And as is true on a lot of furniture when it was designed, this of course this is not a drawer. In fact, this drawer pull is part of a false front, as many of you are used to on other types of furniture, where they even put a little groove here. So notice they're trying to make it look like, it's just a desk with drawers. And of course, if this was a desk, this could have been a drawer. But you can't have a drawer there because you got a big, giant, white rotary sewing machine that's going to be, snuggled down in there when it's not being used. So, look at this drawer. This is in the top drawer. I'm going to pull it out. And it's got some bobbins in there. But do you see these two wooden pieces? These two slots, they could have been used for many things. But in this case, this was a place for people to store ink pens, probably fountain pens. And there would have been an option, I'm sure it was an upgrade, just like it was at Singer, you could get an inkwell. And I'm willing to bet that a number of salespeople probably said, oh, we'll throw in the inkwell for you. And so again, you might try to imagine, remember what I was saying about the average house. Homes were half the size on average they are today in North America. And you can imagine someone going into the dealer. The first thing they do is they get sticker shock because people didn't buy sewing machines every year. They might buy them once in a lifetime or once after multiple decades. And so they get sticker shock because the prices have gone up. The features have changed. The machines look different than the one perhaps that they had or their grandmother had. And now the salesperson says, well, now, do you have a place to put this machine? Where will you be doing your work? And, I'm just trying to imagine the conversations that would have gone on in the retailer. And the dealer wants to sell the tables. And you can see them maybe asking the customer, well, may I ask, where do you do your correspondence? Because remember, guys, in 1948, circa, this is around the time of this machine and table, there was no texting. There was no email. And so most of the communication amongst people, if it was not a local phone call, because remember long distance phone calls were outrageously costly, you wrote. People wrote letters and they were handwritten on stationery, and they, the ballpoint pen is pretty old, but a lot of people were using fountain pens. They had little ink wells and they were dipping their pens and writing letters in beautiful manuscript, handwriting. So you can imagine the salesperson may have said, hey, may I ask, where do you do your correspondence, your writing? Many people would have said, well, we sit at the kitchen table and we do that. And the salesperson might have said, oh, but is that ever distracting with people in the kitchen? Oh, yeah, it's not great. I wish I had a secretary desk, or I wish I had an office space, or who knows what they were asking for or wishing for. But the salesperson had an answer, because this table, when the machine folds away, it becomes a writing desk, and it looks like one. And the only people who will ever know that it's a sewing machine are people who sew, because of course when you close the lid, there's that little line. But it didn't matter. The idea behind this is that you could sell people a sewing cabinet. And remember, sewing was not just a hobby, it was an essential thing. A lot of the family's clothes were made at home with fabric and garment patterns. And so now you could justify as a customer, well, should we do this? Are we going to have room for it? Well, we'll make room, because this is going to be where we write out all of our bills. This is where we write all of our letters. And I can't emphasize again, letter writing, which sounds like kind of a cool, hip hobby, that was a primary way of communicating with folks. So it was very important to be able to sit and focus and concentrate on your writing. And now you could. And you could even have a place to store your fountain pens and your inkwell. And I will say one last thing about this table. As was true the first time I got one of these, again, this is a circa 1948, and the table, it's walnut veneered. It has beautiful veneers on it. It needs some reconditioning and repair to its finish. And just like the first time, when I picked this up, it was sitting in a garage. It hadn't been there very long. And the person who got it, I think they must have gotten it at a storage sale or something. Anyway, they got it and they thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. And they put it for sale online. And when I went to get it, I took the white rotary that you've been seeing in all my videos, because it's now ready for sale. It's going to be posted. I took the machine out, and I took the drawers all out, and I put those in my vehicle. And then I was, the gentleman said, okay, I'll help you. And we were going to load the table up into the trunk. Folks, this is the absolute heaviest sewing table I have ever picked up in my life. I don't know if it's made of locust wood or ironwood or what, but I have moved a lot of tables, and I'm decently strong, but I'm telling you, if you ever get one of these, you need some muscles and some help, because this is, it beats anything I have ever seen. It is the heaviest table I've ever moved. The only table that might be heavier is one that I will point to in my upcoming video on just how much tables cost. There was another table design that had a whole other row of drawers on the left side. Keep in mind that a lot of these tables had their drawers on the right because most people are right-handed. I suspect you could have custom ordered one with the drawers that you see on the right on the left side. Or you could order, the Mac Daddy Ultra, as good as it gets table. Very few people did, and those tables had rows of drawers on both sides, and they are crazy heavy. They're wonderful tables, but you really need to think about moving it the way you would move like a refrigerator or something. But anyway, there you have it, guys. These tables are incredible. I have been handling them now for almost 9 years, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Treadle or whether it's even like a 1960s Husqvarna Scandinavian mod design. The quality that went into these tables is amazing. Most of the time, I get them from people who tell me, well, we don't really have room in the house, and we don't like the way it looks with our decor. And these tables are in attics, or they're in basements, or they're in garages, or in storage sheds outdoors, barely kept covered from the rain. And the irony is, I'm willing to go out on a limb and say, for most of us, and I'm including myself in this, the furniture we have in our house is going to vary. Some of it's really nice, some of it's, but I'm willing to tell you that I would lay bets that the quality of these tables from the vintage era is as good or better than any of the rest of the furniture in our houses. Again, I include my own furniture as well. And so I am not ashamed to have these tables in my house. Obviously, I have quite a few because I'm overhauling machines, but they stay here for a while. This is kind of their rescue spot until they find new homes. But I can tell you that the quality is there. Remember, these sewing machines weighed more than bowling balls, and they were god-awful heavy. And the tables had to be strong, but I also think that the tables and the cabinets, they represent, just like the machines, they represent a different era and a different set of norms that people had as consumers. Their expectations for quality were quite high, and not just for wealthy people. Working class people expected quality. Now, they couldn't buy as much or couldn't get as many fancy features as if they're wealthier cousins, but it meant something to people because, remember, they had these very often all their lives. They would buy them when they were young, just starting out as a couple, and they would have them their entire lives. So the next time you see a sewing table and you think, oh, that old thing, give it a little respect. It may look dusty, it may look dirty, it may be missing most of its varnish. We would too if we sat out in the garage. But I have to tell you, they're worth tending to. And stay tuned because I'm going to be making videos. I feel so strongly about this. I used to think I was a nerd because I geeked out on these vintage machines. Now I'm really geeking out on these old tables, but I can't help myself. I really hope that people will learn to appreciate them And because, like many of you, I have no interest in refinishing and stripping furniture because I've done it before, and it's, you got to really want to do that. There is a way to recondition these tables, make them beautiful again, and it doesn't have to take a lot of time. It's not as big a project as you might believe. And stay tuned, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to my channel. There's no cost to do so, and you can click on the bell symbol and it will keep you updated on when I post new videos. But this is part of a series. Every time I do a video, I end up talking about future videos I'm going to do, and I end up with a new series. But there you go. I do think these cabinets are awesome. And it doesn't matter whether you like one wood color or another, or you prefer one style. That's not what it's about. It's about the quality and the fact that these tables often get treated like garbage, and they're not. They're a lot better than most of the furniture that we keep indoors. So anyway, thanks for watching, folks. Stay tuned for continuing videos in this series. We're going to talk about how much people used to pay, because I found evidence of that, and it was shocking to me. We're going to talk about how to recondition them and make them beautiful again, so you'll be proud to have them in your home where they belong and not in a garage somewhere. And we're also going to talk about how to move them, because sometimes you go to buy a machine and it's a big cabinet like this. How do you get them moved without tearing up the machine or the cabinet? So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you next time.